Okay, I was asked to give an introduction to Brittany, and I want to do it more or less as a fan, and as somebody who has been admiring the work that she does. And I would like to think that I understand some of it, and I want to enjoy all of it, and I want to follow it and see where it goes. And I think that's the whole point. I want to point to, she's got an extensive biography. She said I don't have to read the whole long one, but I kind of want to. But look, as a professor of journalism, I teach part-time at the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism. And every year I hear from students who say, if I care about something and I show that I care about something, won't that discredit me? Won't that make it seem like I'm not neutral? Won't that make it seem like I'm not fair? I said, well, you can make that mistake, and that is a challenge that you have to be aware of. But the much greater challenge is doing mediocre work because you're writing and reporting and doing stuff that you don't care about, right? That's the real problem. You should worry more about being a boring journalist than about being a passionate, committed journalist. You know, you'll never get in trouble for caring too much about your subject matter. It will take you into places, it will show you different avenues of reporting, different angles. It will actually enable you to be a better, in my opinion, fairer reporter of what you see, because you really want to get all of the nuances down, and you're going to pay more attention than the people who don't care. And I think of Brittany in that way, because she leads with her heart. You know, from the protests in Ferguson that we all saw, to Teach for America, to the Ferguson Commission and President Obama's task force on 21st century policing, she's there. She's in it. She's talking in a way that you just saw. She's bringing insight. She's bringing herself and her heart and her hopes and just laying it out there and letting people know what she cares about. And that's kind of where I think the trail that she is blazing is leading all of us. Care a little bit more, be a little bit more passionate. Don't get so hung up on which institution or institutional role you might be playing. Because as you've seen, she might serve on a federal commission. She might work with something like Teach for America. She might be doing something that I still can't even believe she's doing. You know, in addition to all this other stuff, she's doing Pod Save the People, and they're on the road doing stuff live. So they're going to be in New Orleans, and they were just in Brooklyn, and they're going from city to city to city, talking to crowds, doing great work. A very listenable podcast. You should check it out. She's doing TED Talks. She's showing up in London. She's showing up everywhere that she's needed, and she's making a life and a career out of it in a way that many of us, I think, should just both admire, try and learn from, try and support to the extent that she's raising issues. That website they created with all of the policy issues, the Vision Zero, was Vision Zeros now. It was extraordinary, and it went from the website to national discussion. I will tell you, I'm on CNN 4 or 5 times a week. I would check that if we were going to talk about criminal justice. I would check that before we go on the air. Why not? What are the issues that people are talking about? What should Hillary Clinton be thinking about? What should Bernie Sanders be thinking about? Where are the Republicans going to go on criminal justice reform? Well, there are a number of sources that you would normally check. You're going to check the Vera Institute. You know, you're going to check a number of the usual sources. But after you're done checking with what they've got at Brookings or whatever they've got going on, whatever discussion's happening at the Marshall Project, you would look at everything. And you want to see where the communities are coming from. The movement for Black Lives was absolutely setting the agenda in New York City for any number of weeks. And it was something that if you didn't understand it, you were kind of on the outside looking in. So I want to invite to the podium a trailblazer whose journey is going to take her and us to places that we can't quite anticipate. I think it's a fascinating kind of question mark out there. Where are we going? Where is this going to end up? Which of the many reform items and possibilities are going to actually become policy? which of the many young people who are being inspired by the work that was done ever since Ferguson are going to rise to leadership, get themselves elected. She's working on those kind of projects as well. I think it's a fascinating story, and we're going to hear, I hope, about whatever the next chapter might be. Please join me in welcoming to the podium Brittany Packnett. Brittany Packnett.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I think the second most embarrassing part about that video, besides just having to sit there and watch myself, is how many hairstyles I've been through in the last few years. You gotta keep it fresh and interesting. I wanna thank John Jay College not only for this honor, but for the work that you do every day to change the future of criminal justice in America. I met Carol Mason when I was but a young buck on the President's 21st Century Policing Task Force, and you took a lot of pity on me and great care of me. And it is deeply inspiring to see a Black woman doing what you do every single day and facing down systems that were never built for us in the first place. So I'm deeply grateful for your leadership, for your friendship, and for your kindness. Yes, absolutely. I want to shout out some fellow St. Louisans in the crowd because I saw my friend Rachel Littman when I walked in. Listen, there were not a lot of people who reported accurately on Ferguson, but I can tell you that Rachel was one of the folks who did, along with many of her colleagues at NPR and in St. Louis. And so I want to thank you. I want to congratulate the other honorees. When I first saw the poster and they were like, the other honoree is Sarah Koenig from Serial, I was like, I must not be the person you're talking about because there's no possible way I could be next to her. The stories that you all tell cut straight to the core of who we are in our darkest times and in all of the places we want to ignore. And when I listen to Serial, especially this last season, I hear my cousin, I hear my uncles, I hear folks who I am able to hear from every day, but I know the rest of the country doesn't. And so I am grateful for you all being brave enough to tell the stories that nobody else will tell. And I'm deeply, deeply honored to be sharing this honor with you. A couple of other shout outs, the Marshall Project, ProPublica, Vera Institute. You all provide a lot of the research and the reporting that we share on Pod Save the People, and we are really there to act as amplifiers and help people make sense of the knowledge that you bring us, and so I'm grateful for your work. I'm deeply grateful to all of the journalists in this room, especially knowing what you are going through right now, knowing that there was someone just apprehended who wanted to take out some of your colleagues. I thank you for waking up and doing what you do every single day because it informs us to be able to do what we do every single day. In their absence, I thank DeRay and Sam and Clint, my co-hosts on Pod Save the People, and my brothers in arms and my fiance, Reggie, for your patience and your support and for being really quiet when I record the podcast. So it was early one August morning in 2014. And by early, I really do mean early. It had to be about 3 or 4 a.m. because that's when we were up to edit the newsletter. It didn't actually matter if we had slept the night before. We usually hadn't. We still had to compile, fact check, edit, and share the news. Ultimately, over 12,000 people worldwide subscribed to our very first venture, the Ferguson Protester newsletter. Before there was a podcast or Campaign Zero or a sea of policy change, before there were grand speeches or TV interviews, before people wanted us for documentaries, and back when people were calling us low-life, classless Black thugs, all we had were our tweets, our vines, our periscopes, and our words. We collected every one of those we could from one another and from our burgeoning protest community and created a newsletter to do what we were slowly discovering was the essence of protest, telling the truth out loud and in public. First, we told that truth with our bodies, next with our platforms, then with this newsletter. And many people don't know that this was our first very accidental foray into telling stories on the importance of what we now refer to as police and criminal justice reform. We were just tired, physically, sure, because 2 a.m. tear gas night after night tends to do that to you. But we were tired of living the truth while the news reported lies. We were tired of having our lungs worn from shouting the facts while mainstream outlets were silencing our voices. Our spirits were certainly exhausted from having to scream just to have our humanity acknowledged, and still so often be unsuccessful. And in those early days, DeRay and Netta were the public faces of the newsletter, and my dear friend and law professor Justin Hansford and I, we were the shadow editors. Because both of us had professional positions, ones that were more important to our communities than they were to our pockets, that had already come under threat because we were audacious enough to be Black and have an opinion on our dignity and the killing of Michael Brown Jr., who, as far as I'm concerned, is the real founder of the Ferguson Uprising and what you may now know as the Movement for Black Lives. The four of us were up early that morning discussing what was next. By now, we had been producing the newsletter for a week or two, and we were quickly becoming a digital and grassroots organizing collective of four folks who were just tired of being tired. We had to decide who we were going to be. So yes, at 3 or 4 in the morning, somewhere between a protest and a job, between a nap and a shower, we were determined to define our driving principles. And we arrived at 3. 1, low ego. 2, high impact. 3, truth, always. And these have been the marching orders my entire life, but certainly in these past nearly 5 years of what I consider to be the next chapter in the civil rights struggle in this country. See, I do not come to this work of storytelling as a journalist or as a political editor or as an operative. I come to this as an activist. I come to this as a person always concerned with telling stories to achieve freedom and not ratings, to pursue justice and not sensationalism. We have always fought not because we want to, but because we have to. We come to this with as low an ego as humans can muster, as deep a desire for high, real, felt, demonstrable impact as humans can achieve, and as committed to the awesome responsibility of inconvenient truths as humans can be. I come to this work of telling the story of people and data and fact with the hope that the truth will actually once and for all set us free. At first, the decision to be radically candid in every form of media was to simply survive. In the spirit of Zora Neale Hurston, when we stood in the streets of Ferguson, we knew that if we were silent about our pain, the police could have killed us and told the world that we enjoyed it, that we asked for it, that we had it coming. Cell phone cameras stood between us and a lie. Tweets stood between us and arrests. Live streams stood between us and death. Now, we use every platform at our disposal because cell phone cameras and tweets and live streams still stand between us and lies and arrests and death. Sometimes they protect us. Other times, they do not. Black and brown and poor people are still losing the battle for the dignity of ourselves every single day at the hands of a system that was never built to serve and protect or rehabilitate us. Women and LGBTQ and disabled folks of color walk daily in bodies still policed simply for daring to exist and not cower in shame. Immigrants can't afford to dream American dreams anymore because it's the dreaming that gets you caught. And because those inconvenient truths still exist, we have to keep coming back and telling that truth until there is no more story to tell, until the truth is something else entirely, until the only thing left to report is that love is alive in public and justice rolls down from those hills that Martin talked about, but we can't even see. Tonight, I charge us with listening to all of those stories that don't make it to Apple or to Spotify, that can't be downloaded with one click, and you can't purchase a ticket to hear them live. Those stories live with the man standing outside the bodega you frequent. They live with the neighbors who can only afford to move out as your block changes. The stories you most need to hear are the stories of the lynched voices whose names hang in memoriam in Alabama and the silenced voices that once roamed Rikers. The stories you most need to hear are from the freedom fighters whose names you'll never know and whose pictures will never grace our flyers. The stories you most need to know are right next to you in classrooms and on playgrounds and cabs and Ubers and Lyfts and buses and subways and sidewalks. Chances are you have not heard these stories, but that is by design. We're socialized to conceptualize injustice like it's an episode of a critically acclaimed drama, sensational, gritty, but episodic. It's not. Injustice, especially in this world at this time and in this political age, is not an anomaly. It is a constant, and surviving it, a lifestyle. We are trained to believe that the stories we haven't heard are unheard because they either don't exist or because the victims cannot tell it. The stories exist. We just haven't been listening. And everyone can tell their story. We just have to have a low enough ego, desire high enough impact, and love the truth enough to stop trying to be a voice for the voiceless and instead pass the mic. We continued the newsletter to be sure that the words of people were being heard alongside the voices determined to speak for us. More people subscribed, and the more that happened, the more we realized that we needed to give people as many ways to access the truth as possible. So we launched We the Protesters, a database and community for activists across the country. We started the Ferguson Fireside conference calls with America, allowing anyone from around the world who wanted to hear our voices from the ground call in. And I was nominated to write the Ferguson Protester open letters. Still ghostwriting, now less for positional security and more for the sake of community, I consult with members of our growing protest family and do my level best to carry our collective voices through to America without interruption or shame. I had written a few letters by the time we began to get word that the grand jury would be returning any day with the word on whether or not Darren Wilson would be indicted for killing Michael Brown. In anticipation, I wrote 2 letters, ready to be sent to the thousands of people who had signed up for our text and action alerts the moment we heard the verdict. You already know what happened that night. Here's the letter I wrote, the one that we ended up sending. In Ferguson, I said, a wound bleeds. For 108 days, we have been in a state of prolonged and protracted grief. In that time, we have found community with one another, bonding together as family around the simple notion that our love for our community compels us to fight for that community. We have had no choice but to cling together in hope, faith, love, and indomitable determination to capture that ever-escaping reality of justice. After 108 days, that bleeding wound has been reopened, salt poured in, insult added to the deepest of injury. On August 9th, we found ourselves pushed into unknown territory, learning day by day, minute by minute, to lead and support a movement bigger than ourselves, the most important of our lifetime. We were indeed unprepared to begin with, and even in our maturation through these 108 days, we find ourselves re-injured, continually heartbroken, and robbed of even the remote possibility of a judicial resolution. A life has been violently taken before it could hardly begin. And in this moment, we know beyond any doubt that no one will be held accountable within the confines of a system to which we were taught to pledge allegiance. The very hands which we pledged that allegiance were not enough to save Mike in surrender. Once again, in our community and our country, that pledge has returned to us void. For 108 days, we have continuously been admonished that we should let the system work and wait to see what the results are. Well, the results are in, and we still don't have justice. This fight for the dignity of our people, for the importance of our lives, for the protection of our children is one that did not begin with Michael's murder, and it will not end with this announcement. The system you have told us to rely on has kept us on the margins of society. This system has housed us in her worst homes, educated our children in her worst schools, locked up our men and women at disproportionate rates, and shamed our women for receiving the support they need to be our mothers. This system you have admonished us to believe in has constantly, unfailingly, and unabashedly let us down, kicked us out time and time again. This same system in which you have told us to trust, the same system meant to serve and to protect its citizens, has once again killed 2 more of our unarmed brothers. Walking up a staircase and shot down in cold blood, we fight for Akai Gurley. Playing with the toy after police had been warned that he held a BB gun and not a real gun at only 12 years old, we fight for Tamir Rice. So you will likely ask yourself, now that the announcement has been made, why do we still take to the streets? Why do we still raise our voices to protect our community? Why will we still cry tears of heartbreak and sing songs of determination? We will continue to struggle because without struggle, there is no progress. We will continue to disrupt life because without disruption, we fear for our own lives. We will continue because Asada reminds us daily that it is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. We must love and support one another. We have nothing to lose but our chains. Those chains have bound us, all of us, up for far too long. And do not be mistaken, if one of us is bound, we all are. We are all together bound up in a system that continues to treat some folks better than others, a system that preserves some and disregards others, a system that protects the rights of some and does not guard the rights of all. And until this system is handled, until the status quo that deems us less valuable than others is no longer acceptable or profitable, we will struggle. We will fight, we will protest. Grief, even in its most righteous state, cannot last forever. No community can sustain itself this way. So we will continue to stand for progress and stand alongside anyone willing to make a personal investment in ending our grief and taking a personal stance in achieving justice together. We march on with purpose. The work continues. This is not a moment, but a movement. The movement lives. So I tell you tonight that the movement lives. I'm grateful for this immense honor, and I accept it on behalf of each and every brave storyteller who lives difficult truths every single day because they choose to fight. I treat it not as an accolade, but as an indication of the work ahead and a symbol of my ongoing responsibility to amplify, always question, always tell the truth, and pass the mic. Thank you, and God bless you.